Hi, I'm Deborah Jacobs, President and CEO of the Patterson Foundation. We're about to take a journey into realizing aspirations. As we think about the Patterson Foundation, we're all about realizing aspirations by strengthening people, organizations, and communities. But it all starts by living our values. And from inception, the Patterson Foundation has been intentional about not only developing our values, but living them every single day. We will hear in conversations people saying or using our values as an example. We've segmented them into three different groups. Amplifying impact. It's all about people are doing great things, but with the Patterson Foundation's assistance, we are amplifying the impact that organizations and communities have. And we do that because we value expertise, much more than just a check, but we bring talent to the table that will help people, organizations, and communities take advantage of technical support or expertise that they might not otherwise have. We believe that it is important for the Patterson Foundation to be accessible and engaged. We are out, whether it's at booths or functions or in conversations with people, organizations, and communities. It's not about arriving with the answer, but rather it's about being engaged in co-creating the future that we all have aspirations for. Be assured that we know we don't have the answers. And when we think about how people who are toiling every day in their lives and their families and their neighborhoods and their organizations and their communities, we know that there are lessons to be learned. And then once we learn those lessons, we are all about changing, modifying, but also sharing what we learn so others can take advantage of it. The Patterson Foundation is about commitment and persistence. We know that real lasting change is not an event, but rather it's a process, it's a journey. So we must stick to it, and we must be persistent in pursuing the excellence that people do quest. And we do this by embracing new and best practices. It doesn't mean that everything new is the right answer, but rather we're open to it because we're willing to experiment and try, but we also are about embracing best practices. They have been proven through evaluation and practices other places. We look at a mosaic, and we're like the grout in between those colorful jeweled tiles. So we do what others may not be able to do, don't do, or it's just not in their DNA to do it. The Patterson Foundation is about thrivability. We could have used the word sustainability, but that sounds just a little bit dull. And the Patterson Foundation lives in a world of color. And so we're about how can we help people, organizations, and communities actually thrive. And we do that by blending integrity with joyful stewardship. Joyful may not be a word that you often hear when it comes to how an organization will function, but we have been blessed with an opportunity of flexibility and responsibility that we have an opportunity to demonstrate joyful stewardship as we are careful and we do it forthright with integrity and honesty. We also realize that change requires resources. We go deep with our resources, both our talent resources, our expertise, and our money. And we know that change takes time, which time is also a resource. In fact, time is the most precious of all resources because it's not renewable, and we must be good stewards of it. The Patterson Foundation focuses on impact while leveraging resources. Again, we don't do anything alone. Rather, the Patterson Foundation works with others to co-create and embrace aspirations so that we can make that thriving, lasting change in our community. The Patterson Foundation often does challenge grants, which have proven that everyone can be a philanthropist and people will be able to make their resources go further when we combine them together. So the Patterson Foundation brings the process of connecting, learning, sharing, evolving, and strengthening. Now let's see how these weave into the work. by using our connecting, learning, sharing, evolving, and strengthening, we are able to achieve the results that people are connected and engaged in working together rather than in isolation. Community aspirations and synergistic systems are evolving, and organizations are strengthened internally and more connected externally. Connected actions are fulfilling a shared vision that people, organizations, and communities embrace. And there's improved outcomes that are realized by those people, organizations, and communities. And why do we do it? Because everyone will have a greater impact and are thriving. How does the Patterson Foundation select the work that it does? That come about. There's ideas, there's issues, there's challenges, and they continue to foment. And the Patterson Foundation keeps its antenna up to see what is evolving and when is the time right to create an initiative. And our considerations are around multiple factors. Number one, is there alignment of leadership, willingness, readiness, capacity, and culture? We also call that LWRCC. That's not only to select an initiative, but we find even throughout an initiative, the alignment of leadership, willingness, readiness, capacity, and culture is always something that ebbs and flows as you're working with others. Again, the Patterson Foundation looks to see what others aren't, can't, and won't do. It makes no sense for us to duplicate what other people are doing. We may be working in the same space, such as early childhood development for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, but while others are doing programs, the Patterson Foundation may be doing technical assistance or filling a gap that others are not doing. We also make sure that we have the expert knowledge to bring to the table. We find people who are experts and we can bring them to the conversation, because we find that people, organizations, and communities are very focused on their daily lives or their daily missions or their daily priorities. And by being able to bring experts to the table and provide time for people to think and learn, that is what helps us. But again, must have that alignment of leadership, willingness, readiness, capacity, and culture. And it all comes down to relationships. Relationships aren't built in a day, they're not built in an event, but rather they're built over time. We often say that change happens at the speed of trust, and trust is at the core of relationships. So we must find ways to build relationships and to build trust. So the initiatives that emerge out of the issues and the challenges and the aspirations and the alignment of things truly narrow down to two areas: community aspirations and strengthening organizations. That is the focus of what the Patterson initiatives are about. So the Patterson Foundation is almost like a little bird who's above the situation, looking down at all of the good things that are happening. We'll often talk about how do we connect and, again, bring people together around opportunities. Rather than problems, we look at opportunities. Rather than issues, we look at possibilities. But we do our due diligence and we see new possibilities when there is that alignment of leadership, willingness, readiness, capacity, and culture. Let's think about the elements of the process. And I love this slide that shows the puzzle pieces, because again, everybody's got a piece of the jigsaw puzzle, and it's how perhaps the Patterson Foundation can help the puzzle pieces fit into a glorious jigsaw. Who, when we talk about? We've talked about people, organizations, and communities. They are not in isolation, but rather they are all distinct but yet synergistic as they work together. On the what, we talk about moving from issues to aspirations, from enabling the current situation into engaging for future aspirations, moving out of silos into thinking about systems, and moving from outputs to outcomes. And again, it's all about connecting, learning, sharing, evolving, and strengthening. But let's go a little bit deeper. When we talk about the who of the people, organizations, and communities, let's first look internally, particularly in organizations. We talk about 6 internal constituencies. And think about any organization that you have been involved in. It is so important that the CEO or the executive director, the board, the staff, donors, volunteers, and beneficiaries all understand what's going on. How often have we seen a disconnect when maybe the board knows, but the donors don't know? Or maybe the CEO knows, but the staff doesn't quite know and understand. So when we talk about embedding and working with organizations, we are all about making sure that those 6 internal constituencies all understand why an organization is undertaking the work that they've chosen to do. Then we look at external sectors: people, business, nonprofit, government, and media. And why those 5 sectors? We have learned that if you don't have all 5 talking about whatever the opportunities and aspirations and possibilities are, you won't be flowing on all cylinders. Because if you just talk to nonprofits, you're missing the great opportunity of the wisdom from business and the implications from business and the policies from government that may advance the change that's interested. And always media and communications, both traditional and non-traditional, are critical to keep the information flowing so that people who are at the center of everything can be engaged. So we think about those external sectors on every initiative that we work with. We also think about geography. The Patterson Foundation focuses locally on a 4-county area: Sarasota, Manatee, Charlotte, and DeSoto counties. Then we also look at how do our 4 counties fit into a statewide aspiration. And then the Patterson Foundation continues to work with national partners to bring that expertise to the table that helps our local and region work smarter, better. The Patterson Foundation has discovered by engaging our community, we also can do things pretty successfully as a community and then send it back up to our national partners who learn from us as well. So that learning and sharing is embedded in every way that we work. The Patterson Foundation also has a global partner, and that would be in our disaster world, but at the same time, we look to them about the different constituencies on making sure that we are not having any disconnects in embedding the change that is the aspiration. So when we think about the what of any initiative, the approach is that we are moving from issues to aspirations. Rather than focusing on problems and challenges and barriers that tend to get us stuck, we look at how can we create a shared vision and look at possibilities. It's amazing when we take the time to listen to where people are coming from and what is important to them, that we actually discovered that we have shared aspirations. When we look at moving from the negative tone of issues to a positive tone of aspirations, people tend to like to be at that table to create those possibilities. It's also so important that we are not enabling situations that keep people in a situation or enabling organizations to stay at their present financial turmoil or whatever the circumstance may be, but rather we're engaging people because every person, every organization, and every community has assets. So identifying what our assets are and building upon them and making the connections between your assets and our assets and the region's asset, that's how we will have that shared aspirations, when we engage rather than enable. It's so important that we move from our silos. We often talk about de-siloization. That is when we're thinking about a system of community. And we can think of many different systems who actually think they're the system, whether it's a school system, whether it's a library system, and yes, indeed, they're systems, but in a community, they are but one of the silos. So if we can continue to figure out how to get our silos to de-silo and come together and see how together we're bringing those assets, it's phenomenal the change that we can make around those shared aspirations. Likewise, when we talk about moving from outputs to outcomes, outputs, those are the specific accomplishments that we gave away 10 brochures. We gave away, we did things that are specific accomplishments from an action. So yes, we want to feed hungry people, but we also want hungry people to be able to be employed and have good housing. And those are the outcomes that, as we work together beyond our silos, beyond enabling, and beyond issues into aspirations and working together and building upon assets, that we will indeed have a synergistic system that does result in lasting change. When we move beyond actions that perpetuate the now into engaging people to bring their assets, whether they're people, communities, or organizations, so that we can build upon those assets, people and organizations have a greater impact. People, organizations, and communities are thriving, and connections continue to evolve. Nationally, we connect with people, organizations, and communities. Local learnings are shared with national initiatives, and national initiatives continue to be strengthened, evolved, and are shared broadly. You'll see the cookie jar at the bottom of this slide, and it's all about we each have cookies, and the Patterson Foundation strives to make sure that we take the lid off our cookie jar and create the appetite for cookies and for sharing cookies, because everybody's cookies are delicious, but they'll get stale when we just keep them inside of our own cookie jar. It's all about realizing aspirations by strengthening people, organizations, and communities.